Okay, hello Kiev, this is London calling. And this presentation is about OWASP Nettacker Project and how you can use it for recon and vulnerability scanning. My name is Sam Stepanyan. I am OWASP London chapter leader. You can find me on Twitter at SecureStep9. So a few more words about me. As I already said, I'm a OWASP London chapter leader, so a colleague of OWASP Kiev guys. I'm also OWASP chapter committee chair. For those of you who don't know, OWASP has various committees, and OWASP chapter committee is a special committee of several volunteers who are there to help all OWASP chapters to be healthy, active, and make sure they succeed in their role in promoting application security to their local communities. I'm an ex-application developer. I come from software development background, but many years ago, I switched to security. I work as an application security consultant in financial services in London. My clients are various financial services institutions like banks, investment funds, and I also worked for several other organizations, including big IT consultancies. So I'm an application guy and I am a defender. But this talk is about the tool which consists of words network and attacker. So why am I an application guy and a defender presenting a talk about network and attacker? So my story with Nettacker is very interesting because back in 2017, I spotted this little project appearing in the list of OWASP projects. And I thought, what is this Nettacker? I started it once. I saw a screen dump that you can see at the moment with lots of things on it. And I'm like, what is this? And I decided not to continue investigating because I was really confused. And I didn't know that very soon I will have to look at this project again. And what happened is that in 2018, we got an email from the project leaders of OWASP Nettackers, and they said, look guys, there is a Black Hat Europe 2018 conference. For those of you who don't know, in London, we have a European version of Black Hat. So there's a big Black Hat in Las Vegas, but there's also Black Hat Europe in London, and there's also usually Black Hat Asia in Singapore. So we have Black Hat Europe in December every year. And I had an email saying, hello, OWASP London chapter. This is project leaders of OWASP Nettacker. We were supposed to present tomorrow, but for various reasons, we cannot get to London. Can you guys rescue us and go and present the tool at Black Hat instead of us? And we're like, okay, sure, we can do it. So my chapter co-leader, Dr. Greg Frakos, and I, we spent, I think, 2 or 3 hours on a Zoom session, just like this one with project leaders of Nettacker, because we had to learn this tool from scratch. We had no idea what it is. We had no idea how to use it. And of course, we had to demonstrate it. And a massive conference with thousands and thousands of attendees. And that was a bit of a challenge. And next day we presented it, and then suddenly this happened. We had huge crowd of attendees and penetration testers coming to our booth and watching this tool. Everybody loved it. Everyone was interested to see what it is and what it is doing. And we fell in love with this tool as well because we liked it so much. We started using it ourselves in our daily lives for penetration testing, for bug bounty hunting, and also internally in our networks and organizations. We decided to repeat and come back in 2019. And then even bigger crowds gathered to watch us present Nettacker. So what is Nettacker and why it is attracting so many people's attention? So first of all, Nettacker is an open source software tool, and it is built to assist with penetration testing by automating information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. Of course, you can also use it for bug bounty purposes, for example. The great thing about this is that it is written in Python, so it can run on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And it can run on anything which supports Python, really. And one of the interesting things that recently I installed it on Raspberry Pi, and it worked absolutely fantastically. Another important thing to mention is something called Google Summer of Code, because OWASP Nettacker was actually enhanced by students who attended Google Summer of Code. For those of you who don't know what Google Summer of Code is, this is a program, an initiative, which is run by Google every year. And basically the idea is that it is a paid internship for students who want to work on an open source project during their summer break. And students have to apply and say, oh, I would like to work on this open source project. I would like to enhance it. The only condition is that you must be a student. You have to basically write this essay, this application form, and explain your reasons why you want to work on the project, and also do a proposal. And in this proposal, you have to say, I propose these and these new features, or I propose to work on the following tasks. Then Google allocates slots to various organizations. It's not just OWASP participating. There's Mozilla, and there's lots of other nonprofit organizations who participate and benefit from this great initiative to have students involved and spend their summer breaks enhancing open source projects, and also earning a little bit of money from Google. So it is quite important thing to mention that Nettacker was actually enhanced a lot by students. And we hope to get it this year as well. So we will be applying at Google Summer of Code. But for everyone watching, if you are currently a student at a university, definitely check out Google Summer of Code, because the application will start in March. And you can work, of course, not just on OWASP project, but on any open source project which is participating. So what is OWASP Nettacker? You can think of OWASP Nettacker as a Swiss Army knife kind of tool. And just like a Swiss Army knife, it's a tool consisting of many tools. They're not necessarily compatible with each other, but an interesting thing, can they all be used together? Can you pull all the blades out of Swiss knife and will it work? And this is what's great about Nettacker. So it is a collection of tools. It has a modular structure. So each module is a blade in your knife. It's relatively easy to create your own module if you want to. I recently had messages from several people who asked how to create their own modules, and they used it for some interesting tasks within the organizations. It's relatively fast, and it's using multi-threading in Python. You can speed it up. Another great thing about it, that it has customizable profiles. So it's basically bundles of modules focused on specific tasks. So if you think about it, if there are several blades in your knife which are supposed to do some job really well, you can bundle them into and name them in a particular profile and use, let's say, just 5 out of 50 tools together. And of course, another the important thing about Nettacker, that you can automate it and run it from the command line. Things to mention, that the OWASP Nettacker is not officially released yet. It's not a release quality yet. It's not even in beta. It's still in version 0.0.1. We are always looking for more contributors. So if you know Python and if you like the tool and if you'd like to contribute your ideas or help us fix some bugs, you're always welcome. But the great thing about Nettacker, that it is usable right now. And it has a command line interface, as I already mentioned. It also has a web UI, which is very, very handy. It has an API, so you can automate it by sending it an API request. It has a report generator. It has Maltego transforms for those of you who use Maltego for the investigations. And it has over 65 modules at the moment. Where do you find Nettacker? Nettacker is on the owasp.org website under www project Nettacker, or you can just Google it and find its page online. You can see a little this radar logo. So that is the logo of the tool. And where is the documentation? All the documentation is in GitHub Wiki. So you actually, when you go to GitHub and you click on the repository, you have to remember that it's actually on the wiki. I know a lot of GitHub projects don't use the wiki button, but we do. So please do click on that wiki and you will find out all the documentation there, which is split in different sections that you can see on the right-hand side. And that's where you will find installation instructions as well. So just in short, I would like to display the difference between other scanners versus OWASP Nettacker. So if you look at other tools like Burp Suite or OWASP Zap, these tools will primarily scan just one website for many web application vulnerabilities. And these are all the vulnerabilities that the scanner is able to find. And they will also crawl one website to discover all the URLs on it, all the parameters, all the forms. So that's your typical scanner or a DAST tool. So OWASP Nettacker is different. It scans one or many, and it could be hundreds or thousands of IP addresses, networks, or subdomains for open ports or for one or more specific vulnerabilities listed by the user. And of course, you can also, that functionality is bundled in modules, and you can use a combination of modules. That is one of the greatest things about Nettacker. Installing Nettacker, if you'd like to install it, it's on GitHub. Make sure you install dependencies first. Read the manual, which is on the wiki. Remember to click that wiki button on GitHub. And to install the latest version directly from GitHub, you can just use Git and just clone it, and then use pip to install the Python requirements once you have all the dependencies installed. It runs on various Linux operating systems without any issues. I'm going to demonstrate it in Kali, but it runs on Ubuntu. I also use it on my MacBook, and it can also be run on Windows successfully. It's just a matter of configuration and making sure that all dependencies are there. However, dependencies can be a bit of a problem sometimes to configure. And of course, we also have a Docker version. Currently, there is no official OWASP image in Docker yet. I will make sure that it will be there, because obviously I now became a project co-leader, and I help maintain the project myself for the past 2 years now. This is my 3rd year with the project. So there are various Nettacker, you can find Nettacker and Docker in various repos. There isn't one in OWASP official one, but if you use mine, which is secure step 9/OWASP Nettacker, it's I think 2 months old, but it works, and that is based on my own fork of Nettacker. And of course, you can compose your own. Once you clone Nettacker from GitHub, you can just run docker compose up, and that will build your own container that you can use. A very important thing to mention is that Nettacker is an offensive security tool. So you need to make sure that you use it responsibly. You shouldn't misuse this tool nor any other security tool for unauthorized access. Always remember that performing security scans without permission from the owner of that computer system is illegal. Okay, and this is what Nettacker can do. So remember, I showed you the screen of Nettacker when I first ran it in 2017, but lots of modules listed with a comma on the screen, and I couldn't understand what they're doing. So I'm going to break it down for you so you can understand it better. Nettacker currently has 3 module types. There are scan modules, for example, port scan for port scanner. There are vuln modules, which scan for particular vulnerability, for example, Apache Struts vuln. And there are brute modules, for example, SSH brute. And these are the modules who perform brute forcing. So you can see this is where the power of the tool is, because it has 3 different types of functionality combined in one tool, in one Swiss Army knife kind of tool. This is the list of the Nettacker scan modules. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I will highlight some of them. The one with the asterisk, for example, admin scan will try to search for any administrative console, so things like /admin, for example, on the page, and similar administrative consoles from other applications, for example, WordPress or some other known admin consoles. CMS detection scan will try to detect the content management system you're running, whether that's WordPress, Joomla, or Drupal. Dir scan performs directory scanning. this morning first talk from Raman actually mentioned directory scanning. There's ICMP scan, so which allows you basically to ping lots of hosts at the same time and find out if they're alive. PMA scan, so PMA stands for phpMyAdmin. As we know, phpMyAdmin is an administrative tool which a lot of people use and they forget to secure it. And once you find the phpMyAdmin console and just log in with default credentials, or sometimes it's run with no credentials at all, it means you will have full access to the MySQL database, which is running on that website. And then, of course, you can extract all the data from it. So it's quite an important module to have. Port scan is probably the most used module. Subdomain scan, again, going back to the first talk today, where Raman was talking about the subdomains. And of course, he mentioned tools such as GoSpider, Amass, Subfinder, and Aquaton. And now you have another tool to add to your arsenal. You can also use Nettacker to find subdomains. And it's actually even cooler because once you found this subdomains, you can actually do something else with them because you can run all other Nettacker modules on the discovered subdomains. Another couple of interesting modules is Wapalizer scan. Applies Wapalizer, which is a analysis module which will try to identify what are you running on your website, what kind of technologies, what kind of programming languages, what kind of platform. And what is great about this particular module is that it's not using the main Wapalizer in the cloud. It has its own module. That means it can actually identify things which are running on your internal network servers. And WordPress version scan is, again, quite a useful one to find out if any of the websites that you scan are running the out-of-date version of WordPress, because of course that will have some known vulnerabilities. There are a few other WordPress specific scanners. For example, plugin scan and theme scan will do the enumeration. It will try to identify which WordPress plugins and themes are running. Again, this is very useful. Because of course, WordPress plugins and themes, some of them will have known vulnerabilities and people sometimes do not update them, which means they can be exploited by attackers. Let's move on to the vulnerability modules. So there are quite a lot of them. Again, I don't have time to go over absolutely every single one of them. Some of the interesting ones which I've highlighted here is the Citrix CVE one. So if you guys know, in 2020, last year, I think probably exactly just 13 months ago in January 2020, this Citrix CVE was a very important one because a lot of people use Citrix for the VPN access, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of organizations. And there was this vulnerability which allowed remote code execution and bad guys to break into your VPN devices and from these VPN devices, of course, access your network. And Nettacker was actually one of the first tools which released a module to scan for vulnerable Citrix devices. A few other interesting modules that can be very, very useful. So server version scan will show you the server banner from the website. Okay, so of course, that will help you to identify whether that website is running, I don't know, nginx, Apache, IIS, or any other specific server. For example, there are lots of vulnerable versions of Apache, and by looking at the server version, you can identify whether you need to patch that server. Another very, very useful module that I use a lot, again, both internally and externally, but internally it's been very, very useful, is the SSL certificate expired vuln. So that module allows you to scan your network and find all the SSL servers with expired SSL certificates, which is really good. And another one, which is X powered by vuln, is again very similar to server version. That just returns the X powered by server header, which again sometimes tells you exactly the version of, for example, PHP or ASP.NET. Again, that is useful to an attacker because they can exploit vulnerabilities. And for us in the blue team, because I'm actually a blue teamer, is important because if we find a vulnerable or outdated server, we can instruct the infrastructure guys to go and patch it. There are 8 brute forcing modules in Nettacker as well. So there's FTP brute, HTTP basic auth brute, HTTP form brute for your standard login forms, HTTP and TLM brute forcing, SMTP brute forcing, SSH brute forcing, Telnet brute forcing, and also a WordPress XML RPC brute forcing. So with all the brute forcing modules, you can use usernames and password lists and try to brute force into your own devices to see if any of them are using default credentials or any of your users used passwords which were leaked by the cyber criminals. Another important thing about OWASP Nettacker is that originally it was called IoT Scanner, OWASP IoT Scanner, so its Twitter handle is still IoT Scan. So the original idea was that you can use this tool to scan your network for IoT devices, and then you can scan your IoT device for open ports, and then brute force scan for default credentials like admin. And it's a great use case to mention because just last week, I was running Nettacker in a very large organization, and I've managed to discover a whole bunch of video conferencing equipment and cameras on the network, which had default admin username and password. So this was very, very useful. Again, do you know what's running on your network? Do you have IoT devices like cameras, video conferencing devices? You can easily use Nettacker to identify open ports and default credentials. Of course, the most popular module is the port scanner. And again, why? Usually people have a kind of a love and hate relationship with Nmap. My relationship is more of a hate one than love one. I just hate the Nmap, to be honest. I find it's confusing. I can never run it without the cheat sheet. I found that if you run it in a VM, sometimes it crashes the VM. And the results that it produces are not really easy to consume. So the port scanner in Nettacker to the rescue. It's easy to use and faster compared with Nmap because you can actually scan you can define how many threads you want to run using the -t and -m parameters. So you can say how many threads to launch and how many threads per host. So if you're running a network and you're running a scan on the network, you can launch multiple threads and then define per each host that you discover. If you're running a port scan on that host, how many threads to launch to attack it. Don't forget that Nettacker is an attacking tool. And you can use -g parameter, which allows you to list specific ports to scan. For example, you can usually you would only want to check for ports 80 and 443. That would be probably your first call to identify what is running on the server. So running Nettacker 101, how do you launch it? When I first launched Nettacker and I saw the tons of help pages displayed to me, I just closed it and I didn't want to bother to look at it again. But let it make it very, very simple for you to use Nettacker. You only need 2 parameters. And parameter number 1 is target. What do you want to scan? And then next parameter is -m, which is method or the module that you want to use on this target. For example, if you use Nettacker -i 192.168.0.149, that means your target is just 1 IP address and you want to port scan just 1 IP address. You can also use things like CIDR networks. And actually, if we look at the types of Nettacker targets, you can have a single IP address. You can define a range of IP addresses with a starting and ending IP address. You can also use your CIDR with bits. You can use a domain name. You can also specify a URL using protocol such as HTTP or HTTPS. So it is very, very flexible, but the flexible functionality of targets doesn't end there. Nettacker actually allows you to load the list of targets from a text file. And this is really, really great. For example, in your organization, I'm pretty sure you will probably have several subdomains. You will have several IP ranges or some individual IP addresses. And this will be like all your assets that you've got. And if you want to scan all of them, you can compile them all into one text file and just load them from a text file rather than keep defining them on the command line every single time. And of course, another really cool thing that you can do with Nettacker is that you can chain your methods, or you can chain your modules. And if you if you define a target, you can define multiple modules and you just separate it by comma. So for example, if I want to scan an IP address 192.160.0.149, I can run a port scan on it and phpMyAdmin scan on it in one go. And same thing with, for example, if I want to scan OWASP.org for subdomains and also find out server versions, I can do that as well. So this is actually a very cool feature of Nettacker. Let me now stop sharing my presentation and do a little bit of live demo. Okay, so here I have my Kali Linux. I hope you guys can see the screen. Okay, I already have Nettacker pre-installed here. And to run it, I'll just run Python Nettacker with no parameters. Okay, and as I showed you in my very first slide, it spits out its usage. There's lots of information that you can read, but if it's not obvious to you what it's actually doing, I invite you to read the documentation on the wiki. So as we discussed, we can actually run Nettacker by providing just two parameters: target, which we define with -i. For example, I want to scan OWASP.org. That is the website that I'm allowed to scan. Again, a reminder, do not scan networks and websites that you have no permission to scan. And then if I define a module, I can go and say, okay, I want to do a subdomain scan. Okay. And once Nettacker is launched, there you go, you can see how quickly it discovered all the subdomains of OWASP. And to show you another cool feature, which is the chaining, what we can actually do, we can combine a subdomain scan with another one. For example, I can do a server version scan. Okay, and because I want to run my server version scan on each subdomain which is discovered by Nettacker, I need to add this little switch called -s. Oops, it's actually server version vuln. Keep forgetting it, that it's actually a vulnerability. Okay, so what's going to happen now is you can see every single subdomain of OWASP.org is now being discovered, but it also checked on port 80 and 443 automatically if it discloses its server version. And we can already see that on OWASP, we have things running on Cloudflare and nginx, but if there will be some other servers discovered, but this is how it works. And you can see how useful this is. Again, if we go back to the first talk about subdomains, you can actually use a different tool, for example, the same GhostSpider or Amass to create your list of subdomains, and you can actually feed it into Nettacker by just specifying it as a list of targets using -l command. So there you go, you can see how Nettacker works. So I'm now using a default settings, which means it's not particularly fast because it's just using default number of threads. But this process can be made faster by adding the number of threads and the number of scanning threads per each discovered host. And you can see it's actually doing quite a deep subdomain scan. And there you go, we're now finished, and you can see in the results all the subdomains of OWASP with everything that they're running. So you can see we have Cloudflare, nginx, but here we have, for example, Atlassian proxy running on one of the subdomains. So this is great. Very interesting feature of Nettacker. Let me now switch back to my presentation so I can talk to you about profiles. Okay, so as you can see, there are several modules and you can chain them together. And if there are several, if you need to use several modules in one go frequently, it's there's a feature in Nettacker to actually bundle them together. So there are several profiles which come with Nettacker by default. So there is an info profile, scan profile, brood profile, vuln profile, WP for WordPress profile, Joomla for all the modules dedicated for scanning vulnerabilities in Joomla. And there's a special profile, all, which basically means it will use all modules on your target. And if you want to use a profile instead of the module, this is how you do it. You basically, again, define your targets with -i or -l, but instead of -m for module, you define -- profile and then the name of the profile. You can create your own profiles in the configuration file inside Nettacker. If this is difficult for you, you don't want to remember all the modules, Nettacker actually has a wizard mode. You can run it with -w, and it will do an interactive prompt. It will ask you many questions. Please enter the targets, how many threads you want to use, which file do you want to use for the report, etc., etc. So it will just do this step by step. And I'll quickly switch to the demo to show this to you. Okay, back to my Kali Linux. I should have done this correctly. Yeah. So if I do Python Nettacker with no parameters, as you can see, it just displays help. But if I add -w, it starts asking questions. So I can go and say, okay, my target is OWASP.org. Again, an important thing to know here that you can also define several targets, again, using comma-separated list. I can, for example, do OWASP.com. And it'll say, please enter the thread number. Default is 100. Default thread number for each host is 5. Default HTML is result is okay. And these are all the various modules that we can use. And I can go and say, I just want to use subdomain scan, for example. Okay, and I can exclude some methods. Again, why there are exclusions? If you define all, or if you define profile, sometimes there could be too many methods. For example, if you know that you are scanning something which it definitely doesn't have any FTP servers or doesn't have any WordPress, you can exclude them. Because maybe you're just scanning a target where you're only interested in everything apart from a few specific modules. If you are doing brute forcing, you will also be prompted to enter usernames and passwords you want to brute force with. There's also timeout. Can also define port numbers if the module requires port numbers, verbosity, number of retries, and a graph. And you can see I've now launched my search, my scans using just the wizard. Okay. Another cool thing is about Nettacker. You can see every time it works, after it finishes, it leaves this report in HTML file. So it says this report is saved in this folder and also the database. So why in the database? So I explain that Nettacker stores all the scan results in a database. By default, it comes with SQLite database. But if you are using it in your company, in your enterprise environment, you can actually use MySQL database as well, which is more suitable, of course, because SQLite has its limitations. So one thing I wanted to show you about the results, right? And this is another interesting thing about Nettacker in the report. Let me actually show you these previous results from this scan. I'm gonna copy paste this file because it's saved, right? And I'm gonna open it in my browser. So let me go to my Kali Linux menu. I want to open web browser. Okay, here's my default web browser. So if I paste that report, oh, it's actually, I always forget about extra slashes. It should be like this. Let me copy this again. And let me see, does it have enough number of, let me see if I can just open it using the file manager. I think this is probably something changed inside Firefox itself. Oh, it could actually be inside a different folder. Was I in the root? Let me just quickly check which folder was I performing my scans in. It was actually in the root folder, and that's why it doesn't like it. Okay, let me see if I can do this. Okay. Oops, if I could only spell. Because I need to be running as root because I'm not running as root. So let me just fix this quickly. And log in as root. Ooh.
Try password Kali.
Yeah.
The problem is that
I have changed it. Yes.
Default root account.
Yes. Yeah.
Kali.
This is a new version. Is root account now?
Yes, it's prohibited by default.
It's prohibited. Yeah, because I'm used to the old Kali where you can still do this. All right. Let me see. So this is the problem because obviously it cannot open it. But let me see if I can actually grant it permissions. I think it's because the problem is that it's not readable. If I do go into my root, okay, and see if I can actually do this for OWASP Nettacker. And probably even do something like that. Let's see if Firefox will let me open it now. Otherwise, I will show it to you using Web UI, which is also quite a cool thing to see. Okay, let me go back and look at this report again. Actually, I probably already lost it.
One more window with Firefox
yes.
is already opened.
Okay. Yep. No, 1 second. I will do something different. I will just run it again. In the wrong folder. Okay, and I will just generate a new report. There you go. Let's see if it opens it now. Yeah, I keep forgetting about the permissions. Let's try it again. Hopefully the permissions are now correct for Firefox to open it. So obviously Firefox is running as a Kali non-privileged account, but it is still access denied. Okay, that's fine. I will show you something else. I'll show it to you in the Web UI. Let me just switch back to my presentation. I will show you the web report in a few minutes then. Because Nettacker basically saves some graphs, and I'll show you these graphs in a minute inside the web UI. And the cool thing is that there are various graphs that you can use. You can use this D3 tree graph, version 1 and version 2, and also a circle graph. And reports are usually saved in the user, which is currently running OWASP Nettacker in the home folder under the results subfolder, HTML. And of course, they're also saved in a database. But another very important thing about Nettacker results is that you can also get them in JSON format, which is very good if you're going to integrate it with some other systems, or in CSV. And of course, CSV is the greatest format for managers, because it's a manager's dream to scan the infrastructure and suddenly get a spreadsheet. That's very, very useful. So I'm sure that I should be able to show you the spreadsheet. Let's have a look. So let me run the same scan that I run here. Okay, and I will output. So to output your report in a different format or in any format, you have to use the -O command line option. If you don't specify any report format, by default, it saves it in HTML. So let's say I want to save it as results, OWASP .csv. Okay, so it will now just run the scan, and you can see a report now saved in results OWASP.csv and the database. So now I can simply run any spreadsheet program. So I have LibreOffice installed here on my Kali. And lo and behold, we've got the results of the scan in the spreadsheet with all the subdomains discovered. And of course, if we look at bigger scans, all other results for each module will be shown here. So things like port scan, server version scan, for example, you can open these all in CSV format, which is really, really cool. So that's on the results side of things. Now, one of the important things is why this is cool. We talked about asset discovery, because of course Nettacker allows you to discover all your assets, both visible from inside and outside of your company. And there was this tweet back in 2017 by one of the application security legends, by Jeremiah Grossman, quite a famous and cool guy. And he said, I suggest that OWASP Top 10 2017 includes A0 asset inventory. These days, the biggest AppSec risk are websites that you don't know you own. And of course, this is what is great about Nettacker, because you can just use it to discover all your assets, and then you can have them in a spreadsheet, which is great. You can see all your subdomains, all your servers, all your open ports, all the hosts which have default credentials, everything in a CSV file in a spreadsheet. And if you want to feed that data to any other tool, you can just use JSON. Okay, next great thing about Nettacker is API and web UI. To start the API, you just define --start API, which will start the API service. There are several parameters. So for example, API host, by default, it will be bound to localhost to 127.0.0.1. But if you want to bind it to any other IP address or all IP addresses, you can use like 0.0.0. Again, by default, web UI and API will be running on port 5000. Again, you can define whatever you want. And the very important option here is API access key, which is a randomly generated SHA-1 string that you can use as an API key. So let me show you how to run Nettacker in an API, and hopefully we'll be able to see that HTML report that I wanted to show you. So we just have to run Nettacker like this. Say Python Nettacker --start API. Okay, it warns us that this is a development server because it's using Flask rather than a proper production Python web server. And it's a warning, don't use it in production deployment. But for us, running a pen test engagement or bug bounty engagement, it's more than enough. So it tells us that it is running on HTTPS 127.0.0.1 port 5000. And as you can see, it's currently waiting for requests, and we need to press Control-C to quit the Nettacker API or web server mode. And this is the randomly generated API keys that we need to copy, because this is how we authenticate. So let me go and open Firefox again, and then I will go to HTTPS 127.0.0.1 and port 5000. Yeah, obviously we get warned about the certificate not being trusted because it is self-signed, but again, you can add your own certificate. And yeah, there you go. This is what OWASP Web UI looks like. As you can see, it has several buttons. Tutorial is mainly there just to tell you what different buttons do. But if we try to do a scan, for example, or look at the results, it will tell us, please log in first. So we cannot actually do anything. And to log in into Web UI, there is no username or password. We have to use that API key. So let me paste that API key that I copied. There you go. It says success, your session updated. So now what we can do is I can look at the results. So let's have a look at all the scan results. So there you go. This is all the previous scans that I run. You can see how many scans were run. And the one that I want to actually show you is this one, because you can see this is when I run Nettacker with the subdomain scan and the server version vulnerability scanning. And hopefully, there you go. This is the graph that I wanted to show you. This is the cool thing about Nettacker, because you can instantly see visually what is running, and you can see how the attacks were performed. And we can see all the server version vulnerability on various hosts, on which ports they were discovered. And you can see this was Cloudflare here, there was Atlassian here, and we had nginx here, and there you go. You can see that these websites, for example, here, and subdomain scans, they did not have a server version vulnerability. So there was no banner, server banner header in the response. And at the bottom of the graph, we will find a table. This is our spreadsheet with all the assets discovered in that scan. There is a little bit of a visual effect. So if I hover over a particular row, it blurs everything else. So we can focus on a particular line in the report if we want to highlight this. So this is what is really cool about our web UI. You can also do another very, very cool thing with Web UI, and this is why I urge you to use it, because you can use Web UI as your internal showdown server, because you can search for all the results that you discovered. So for example, if I want to find out all the nginx servers, I can just type nginx in the search, and it will tell me that secureflag.owasp.org is the subdomain which is running nginx. If I want to search for any other particular word, for example, let me search for the word Austin. There you go. You will find that there was an austinowasp.org discovered as a subdomain, and you can see all the scans which were related to it. And that is our austin.owasp.org. And we can see that this subdomain had 2 ports open, 80 and 443, and the description of the server banner was Cloudflare, both of them. So this is very, very useful, the search facility. And another cool thing, of course, if you don't like command line, you can run a scan from here. So there's a new scan button, and here you can see all the various modules of Nettacker shown in different colors. You can see that vulnerability scan modules are red. So if I tick the box, you can see they all get ticked. All the scan modules are green, and the brute forcing are orange. And there are also the profiles available like WordPress or Joomla. So again, if I want to repeat the same scan, if I want to do this from the web UI, I can define my target here. Again, I can just go and type owasp.org here. Okay, And I can add another target if I wanted to. And here I can go and tick the box of the particular module that I want to use. Again, for example, I will tick the same subdomain scan. I will choose which graph to use. This time I will use a different one. Reporting language, there are several languages available here. If you want output in a language other than English, probably Ukrainian is missing. It would be good if someone contributes our translation of messages in Ukrainian, by the way. There you go. Once we submitted, you can see that the JSON request went into the engine, and it will now perform it from here. A few other things from Web UI, some of the advanced things, like you can check ranges, check subdomains, you can add the ping flag, you can control the number of threads and the number of threads per host from here, your timeouts, specify specific ports if you want. This is the list of all the users and passwords if you are performing brute forcing. So this is all from the nice web interface. And then if you return to the results, you can see this is the scan is now ready. Sometimes you need to reload, but I can see that this is precisely the one that I asked to the scan to perform. You can see here it says scan was performed through OWASP Nettacker API. And if I look at the previous scan, you can see this was from the command line. So again, if I go and click on this, we will see a different graph because it used a different method, but the same results here. So this is all very cool. Now, if I go back to command line, I can probably show you a few more interesting things. Right, you can see all this time the engine was running in the background, and I can just interrupt it by pressing Control-C. I want to show you a port scan on one of my virtual machines here. Let me see if I remember the IP address, again, just to show you the port scan. I think it's 176, and again, I want to do module port scan. This is how I do it, port scan. Okay, let's see if this is correct. Yeah, there you go. So you can see this is a result of from one particular IP address. You can see there are many, many ports running open on it. So that's where it's very useful. We can see that port 22 is open on this machine. So what I want to show you now, I want to show you brute forcing. And to perform brute force, I want to, because I can see this port 22, I want to do an SSH brute forcing. But I can, for example, just do something like that, like this, SSH brute, and then define the username and the password that I want to test. For example, I don't know, I want to try something like root password. So that is one way of doing the brute forcing. You just define the specific username and password that you want. Well, this didn't work because obviously didn't have it. Another option, you can create a text file with all your passwords. I think I've created one called passwords.txt. There you go. This is a very simple password dictionary. So there's password, various combinations of it, and a secret admin let me in. It's just a bunch of passwords to brute force with. So I'm going to run my brute forcing tool again, but you will notice that I will now change the user to admin because I know that user exists there for the purposes of demo. And I will actually change the P parameter here from a lowercase to uppercase. What this will do, this will allow me to load a file with the dictionary. So I will load my passwords.txt. Okay, and to run the brute forcer. Yeah, and there you go. You can see Nettacker now discovered that user admin had password admin, which is running on this particular host, and logged in successfully. So there you go. This is probably enough for the live demo. Just a few more words about what else is available in Nettacker. For those of you who use Maltigo and Kali, there are transforms available. So the same things that I was showing to you in Web UI. In Maltigo, you can use transforms to enhance your investigation. Once you right click on the target inside Maltego, you can see all the Nettacker transforms listed like that. Unfortunately, we don't have time to demonstrate this today. I've already talked to you about the Citrix vulnerability, and just to remind you that it was out, I think, on in January, and you can see my tweet here where I say I'm preparing a module for that particular CVE because it affected so many organizations all around the world. It was very important for people to know if they're vulnerable or not. And there you go. We had the module ready within a day, and you can run it on your network to discover all the vulnerable Citrix devices. And that's just a bigger screen. And if you want to reuse that module is called Citrix_CVE_2019_19781. Vuln. So you can see our naming convention for modules there as well. So Nettacker use cases, you can use it to summarize. You can use it for asset discovery. You can scan network for open ports. You can scan your network for new hosts. You can scan your network for default credentials like admin. You can scan network for specific vulnerability like the Citrix one I showed you. You can monitor your subdomains and open ports on them. You can discover expired SSL certificates in your IP ranges. You can also find subdomains hosting vulnerable versions of CMS systems like WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. There are some useful commands to take away that I'm going to show. So this is how you can find all the subdomains and grab server banners and X powered by. Because this is recorded, and I also share the slides, you can just use this command. There's a command how to find web services on your network and find out what is running. There you go. This is a command to scan your network range for open ports 80.443, and also run a WAPalizer to discover all the technologies which are running, things like PHP, ASP.NET, struts, etc. You can also find your expired certificates on your network using SSL certificate expired vuln. This is how you detect WordPress version on your network. And this is something that I already showed you, how to brute force your entire network, or in this case, class C, with admin to find those devices which have default credentials. Please contribute to Nettacker. If you decide to contribute, we have a developer wiki and contributor guidelines. Please read them before you submit a pull request. So this is it. Taking quite a lot of time. I think I've got some time for a couple of questions. And again, to remind you that I will be happy to answer questions in Russian if you have them. Дякую за увагу.
Дякую. Thank you. It's very useful presentation. We found that big part of our attendees, it's students and specialists who just starting doing their first step in penetration testing and application security. And for them, this utility and this presentation is very useful. As for me, as for red teamer, I find it's very cool web shell, you know, if you own one host in the network, you just drop the Nettacker.
Exactly. You don't need to install many hosts, and Python is usually available already anyway. And you can just git clone or download the zip file of the Nettacker and just keep on scanning the rest of the network to pivot in.
And with very nice web UI, it's very comfortable to penetrate whole network. Thank you one more time. And yes, we have a question. So I will read it for you. First of all, thanks for interesting presentation and new solution. And short questions. Vuln modules, how we can update it? Do we need full reinstall of the utility?
Can you just, the last bit, Sergey, can you just repeat again? Do we need what?
Do we need reinstall all utility, or we just can do some update only for modules, something like that? Does it have some update system or something like that?
At the moment, there is no auto update. Unfortunately, it's you just need to do a git clone of the fresh version. And I have to warn you, if you're gonna go and try it right now with your latest version of Kali Linux, we currently have an issue with Python version 3.9. Please do not try to run it with 3.9 because it will tell you that it cannot launch threads because because Python 3.9 changed the some of the methods for multi-threading. So we're fixing that. So please use Python 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, or 2.7. Nettacker still supports Python 2, the current version, but obviously we're dropping this very soon because Python 2 is no longer supported, but it is still useful if you have devices which are run Python 2. For example, I run Nettacker on a Cisco video conferencing kit where I just installed it and run it from the Linux shell there. And it didn't have Python 3, it only had Python 2, and Nettacker still worked. But to answer the question, there is no auto update currently, unfortunately. You just have to keep cloning or downloading new versions. However, there is a check every time you run Nettacker. It will say if you have the latest version. And if there's a newer version, you will be prompted. You will see it as the first line when you run the tool.
Okay, the next one. And is it possible include additional modules? For example, typo 3. I do not know what is typo 3.
Yes, of course. Again, that means if you can write it yourself and contribute it, that would be great. Otherwise, you can just raise a GitHub issue as a request for a new feature. And hopefully one of our students who are participating in the project will pick it up and create this module for you.
Yep, and the last one is already, does the tool already include some dictionaries for brute force?
It does. It has some dictionaries for usernames and passwords. They are not that big, but it also has one of the useful dictionaries is directory scan. So you can use it instead of like Buster. So again, for example, if you need to use the directory fuzzing, usually you would have to run several tools. With Nettacker, you don't have to. You can just do a subdomain scan and discover all subdomains of your target, and then run directory buster or directory scanner on each of the subdomains. So it comes with a directory scan dictionary, with the admin folder dictionary, with a phpMyAdmin dictionary, and also with the dictionary for WordPress plugins. And that includes both most frequently used and most frequently vulnerable plugins, but also look at, we have a special command line option to add extra arguments. So which add for that, because this is how you can provide more details. You can use the full list, the full dictionary. So it will load a very big list.